Hello, today I would like to go through a lesson that I provide for my students when I'm working with my alternately assessed students, and we are focusing on the Math Essential Element 5 MD2. And something I like to do with my students is purchasing or buying items. And I like them to either actually purchase the items or pretend to purchase the items. I find that my students are able to be really engaged with that. They find it very motivating. And I want to go through and show you the ways that I provide an assessment. I go through my lesson, then I provide some independent activities, as well as a data sheet that I use for myself or with my paraprofessionals. So let's jump into the actual assessment. And this is something that you can use as a pre-assessment, or you can also use as a pre-assessment and an exit slip, right? So if you are kind of getting some baseline data, you can use this just how it is, and then you can provide it again at the end of the lesson to see if your students actually were able to improve upon what they know before you started teaching them. Or you can provide two different options where you have a set of questions in the beginning and a whole new set of questions at the end. So it's absolutely up to you, but something I like using for my assessments is Kahoot. And Kahoot is a video game based type of question. And my students really enjoy it because they pretend like they're playing a video game. It's very fun. They don't even realize that I'm actually asking them questions. They just think that they're playing a game. And they're really engaged with it. They ask me to play it. So something I'd like to present to you is using a Kahoot for an entry slip or a summative assessment or exit slip. And it could be really fun for your students to engage in. So I asked very simply 5 simple questions. How many steps are there to purchasing an item? What is the first, second, and last step? And then I went through and I asked them what 2 things do they need before they purchase or buy a snack. You can change this if you are completely remote and you just wanted to say, what do you need to provide the cashier with before you take your item, right? So you can modify anything, use as much as you'd like from here, or make it fit the needs of your students within your classroom. But you can definitely use the same Kahoot to assess whether or not your students were able to understand or learn what you were trying to teach them. Or you can provide a very short Kahoot in the beginning that only has 3 questions and something like 5 questions at the end to see whether or not they met the lesson objective. Okay? So let's go through how I would then present my actual information and my lesson to my students. So providing them with a PowerPoint, or whether you want to put this on a smartboard or in a Nearpod or Google Slides, whatever works for you guys, whatever you're using in your classroom, you can provide them with this information. So we talk about buying or purchasing items, and then we break down how to purchase items, and that purchasing items occurs within 3 steps: checking the price tag, counting out your money, and paying for the item. You can see here I embedded some visuals of actual money. If I wanted to go through and talk to my students, have them count with me, have them count and then tell their buddy how much they have, you can do that, right? So let's move along, and I reinforce, in order to buy an item, there are 3 steps. The first step is check the price tag. So what I like about this slide is I will often have my students ask another student how much a certain item is. So I get a lot of engagement within my virtual classroom and when I'm remotely teaching, something that we often feel like is missing when we're teaching remote. But I try to provide this by having my students turn and ask a friend or turn and tell a buddy, right? So we can have John go and ask Ian, how much are the bananas, right? And then Ian can tell John, the bananas cost $3.70. Now, if your students aren't interested in actually going to a grocery store and purchasing actual food, you can use a toy store, you can go to a video game store, you can find any graphic that you would like that would meet your students' motivations and their needs, right? So this worked for my students. They're super motivated by food, they love doing snack shop, and this is what I use to get them to turn and talk to their friends. But I'm also able then to ask my students, okay, Juan, tell me, how much does the fish cost? And I can model the question, and then I can have them turn and do that with their friends. So I really like that engagement. I like that interaction between my students when I'm virtual. So next, we'll move along to the second step, which is count out your money. Do you have enough to buy the item? So here I provided a prompt using Boardmaker, and I really like using Boardmaker to embed within my lessons because then we're always able to provide that access to our students who are using AAC devices, right? So this is always something you have access to, whether you save it as a PDF or take a screenshot. And if your students don't need the icons along with their reading, then you don't have to provide it. But I just wanted to give you some ideas for differentiation and modification. So here we presented a problem to our students. A bag of chips costs $2. You have $3 from doing your chores. Do you have enough to buy the snack? And so I put the images of how much money we have. So the chips cost $2. I have $3. Do I have enough? You can have your students circle them to count them. You can have them box them so they can actually see which one is more, right? So all these different ways to provide your students access and modify for your students to be able to answer the question. So let's move along. And then I said, hand your item to the cashier and pay for the item. And I provided some images for the students to understand who the cashier is, right? Sometimes social awareness is very challenging for some of our students. So I wanted to provide multiple pictures for them to kind of address, who is the cashier in a store? And so that's why we have some pictures and representation for them to understand. The next thing I went through is and I actually made some questions for my students. And so I said, I provided them with some questioning. The burger is $3. How much do you need to buy 3 burgers? And so we can work through this together. We can add 3 plus 3 plus 3. Again, you can make this as hard or as easy as your students need, right? Whether you need to modify and scaffold for your students to be provided with some more support, or if you need to increase the rigor, right? So this is one example that you can provide. You can also have repeated counting. So a soda costs $2. How much do you need to buy 4 sodas? So here I have this one. So we could do 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. You can break it down if your students even need some more support. And what I did with this is I actually had the images here. So the apple is $1. How many apples can you buy if you have $5? And so another way I differentiated and I scaffolded for my students was I had the 5 apples ready so that they can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So you can, again, make this as hands-on and as supported as you need, or you can make it more challenging, right? For example, the comic book costs $5. How many comic books can you buy if you have 10? And again, that would be a little more challenging for some of our students. We have to divide, we need groupings, but I still provided the visual supports, right? I had 2 pictures of the comic books here, so I can kind of keep it here at first. And if I'm going through, I'm like, so we have 5 plus 5, right? So again, you can address this however you need to make sure you meet the needs of your students, but I just wanted to give you some options, right? That you can definitely provide some rigor there. You can ask some questions that may be a little more challenging, but you know you can support them with those visual supports. So that's what I would do during our We Do. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you how I broke down some of my my worksheets for my students. So this is an example of my earlier learner worksheets. I provided a number line for my students. I gave them a little list. You can do this if this works for your students. You can have actual pictures with the price next to them if that's better, right? Whatever your students need for you to be able to support them in the way that they need. My students were able to go through and look on a table, but then I also used some color coding. And I used that color coding because as they identified the numbers, they were then able to put in how much money they started with, how much the item was that they wanted to purchase, and how much their change was. But I provided them with a number line so that they were never too far off. They can always utilize that. And I didn't really go over the number 10 if they wanted to purchase something, right? So here's how much we started with, $4. I asked them, what do you want to buy today? And anything they could have purchased would have still kept them within that number line of 10. So that was my earlier learners. And then for my next level up, I gave them a different list, right? $4 and $2. And I told them on Tuesday you had $8 to start with. So they didn't have it as easy. They had a little more information. They had to write out everything that they had, how much money they had left. There was no number line there. I asked them to write out an equation, and then I challenged them. And then I told them to write out their answer, right? Another way that I had increased the rigor was then to use something like this, where there's multiple things within a chart, right? Asking them to actually purchase 2 brownies, some Doritos, and Oreos, right? So those are the items that they had to purchase. And they had to tell me how much they started with, how much they had left. And then I went into some more information where they had to compare 2 details. I gave them a challenge question, right? So those are some options for various worksheets where you can have them do the you do component of your lesson. And I just wanted to provide you with some of those options that you can scaffold for your students as needed. Now, a way that I like to assess or use data collection during this type of lesson is to use a task analysis. And I like that because there are so many steps, so I want to go through and talk about, are they able to complete each step and what steps can they complete independently? And you can modify this task analysis. Of course, this is for someone who is blended, where they're virtual and in person, so they actually have the opportunity to go through and pretend to purchase items for Snack Shop. But if you were virtual, you can very simply start right here, greeting the cashier, providing what snack they want, making sure they check how much that snack is, counting out the money they have, pretending to pay for the snack. How would they do that? Saying to the cashier, thank you, and then completing their independent work, right? So you can definitely modify this however you need, but I really like this because it gives us however many supports are over here. You can go through the different prompt levels, and either yourself or your paras can fill it out, and it's a really great way to track whether or not your students are able to go through each of those steps. So this is how I would provide a lesson to my students if I wanted to do more of an enrichment activity and not just talk about money, but actually practice using it in a functional way. So I hope you guys can use this lesson. I hope you can use the Kahoots for your assessment. You can use some data sheets, and you have examples for how you would provide some worksheets to your students of multiple levels. Have a great day.